So Corruption Watch has raised urgent concerns following a series of assassination attempts on investigators working on high-profile corruption cases. In the latest incident, senior advocate Coreth Naude is in a stable condition after an attempted hit while she was on a business trip in Durban. Naude is involved in several high-profile investigations. For more on this, we are now joined by Karam Singh, who is the Executive Director at Corruption Watch, to discuss the impact of these attacks and also the protection of those who are on the front lines of justice. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning, Karam. What do you make of the protection of investigators involved in high-profile cases? And I wonder whether the state actually does have the money, but also the commitment to do that.
Good morning, Aldrin, and good morning to all the viewers. This is a serious concern. We've been speaking for years about the need for an enhanced whistleblower support and protection system, but this is now a phenomenon which goes beyond the issues of whistleblowers. We're talking about forensic practitioners, we're talking about auditors, investigators, and now in this recent case, advocate Naude, who are trying to uncover corruption, who are involved in challenging investigations where, as the investigators, they're going to be the key drivers and probably the key witnesses when these matters go to court. And it seems as if we have this phenomenon now where these professionals who are just trying to do their jobs are finding themselves in highly dangerous and vulnerable circumstances. If we look at some of the recent statistics, it shows that in the last decade, we've had 100%, over 100% increase in targeted killings. We have over 70 murders a day in South Africa, but increasingly over the last couple of years, we're seeing targeted killings. Political assassinations, personal assassinations, hits that are related to organized crime, to the taxi industry and elsewhere. And we know that very few murder investigations are actually solved. So, the challenge that we're sitting with is that, some of these investigators are almost like sitting ducks, and it just perpetuates a culture of impunity because the matters that they're investigating don't get finalized, and then the people that are responsible for their murders are very rarely brought to book.
Yeah. So how do we protect investigators? How do we protect lawyers that are representing, for instance, law enforcement agencies in matters related to corruption? How do you do that?
I think there needs to broadly be a culture shift around how we're dealing with corruption in terms of a sustained political will around the fight against corruption. So before we get to the forensic practitioners, we need to first think about how we can create a whistleblower protection and support system, because we know that corruption is only uncovered generally through the courageous testimony of whistleblowers. And whistleblowers are not going to come forward. They're not going to provide information if they feel that they're going to be victimized, if they feel that they're going to come under personal threat and their families. So let's start, first of all, with a political commitment, a political will to say we're going to put in a really substantial whistleblower protection and support system. This requires resources. It's going to require a dedicated public agency, potentially an agency which is tied to a dedicated anti-corruption agency that we're speaking about, and that whistleblowers can go to, that they can remain anonymous if they need to, and that they can get the protection that they need. Then in terms of the forensic practitioners, we need to ensure that there's a proper risk profiling that's done, and where possible that, also the identities, of those that are doing the investigations are somehow shielded and protected. We're spending a lot of money on VIP protection and security for politicians, for members of cabinet. Why can't we have a protection system which actually aids those that are the most vulnerable within the state, whether it be even members of the police themselves, but certainly, the type of investigations that the SIU runs, Advocate Naude is affiliated with SARS. Babita Diakaran was an official at the Gauteng Department of Health. There needed to be a risk profiling that said Ms. Diakaran is under threat and that she can access a protection and safe houses if necessary. And it's clear that that wasn't done at the time because the threat wasn't properly identified.
Yeah. It almost sounds, though, that we will also be going down a very, very dark rabbit hole here, because you are going to then protect, for instance, in this particular case, you protect the forensic practitioners with what? Police officers. But police officers themselves also become targets.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we know that, that there's also infiltration in the police, and we don't necessarily know that, we're not necessarily at a moment where as a country we have absolute trust in the ability of law enforcement themselves to execute their mandate and to ensure that they're free of corruption. Aldrin, I'm not putting any of these proposals forth on the basis that this is easy stuff, or that this doesn't take us into a rabbit hole, that this doesn't require resourcing. But we have a phenomenon now. We're trending in the wrong direction, whereby the kind of violent society that we live in is now biting back against those that are seeking to fight corruption, and that's a real problem.
Should we perhaps have a change in how the judiciary conducts their own inquiries into what happened in answering that particular question? That in cases where you find that there is a high risk of the individuals that are part of the case, whether it is the investigators or perhaps even the witnesses, that those testimonies should be done in camera, as well as the forensic auditors or forensic practitioners as well shouldn't have to go to a court precinct, because then they do become vulnerable. In this particular case, for instance, Naude had to travel to Durban on work.
Yeah, absolutely. She was investigating the case of Sean Mkhize. This is a matter that had been investigated by the SIU probably over 10 years ago, and there still hasn't been any accountability for all of the allegations of corruption in those matters. I think the potential of shielding the identity of key investigators by ensuring that their testimony is done in camera is something that we need to give serious consideration to. And we also need to ask the MPA, how is the witness protection system currently working? Can you only get protection in the context where you're a witness in an ongoing prosecution, or is there a possibility for others, whether they be professionals or key witnesses in ongoing investigations prior to prosecutions, receiving that kind of support and coverage, and as you intimate, a system whereby they're able to give testimony in a context where their identities are shielded and protected.
Because we saw that with the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, made reference to Mr. X, who testified in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. But just quickly, though, there's a bigger problem, which is it is a societal problem when it comes to corruption. If you look at contract killings, which have now also become popular, they also come cheap, some say.
Cost of life, sadly, in South Africa, in this context, is very cheap. You can, if you've got the networks that allow you to get into it, you can hire somebody, and for not a huge expense to be able to engage in this kind of activity. So there is a political will challenge that we've been sitting with for years in the fight against corruption. We're seeing corruption related to organized crime, related to syndicated criminal activity, and that organized crime comes with a real sharp end of threats, intimidation, and violence. So as a society, as a culture, that if we had a sustained commitment to the fight against corruption, if we saw the leaders continually messaging on this, we saw the proper resourcing, we see the proper implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, it's possible that we can tilt this and try to trend in a better direction. But at the moment, we're not there. And at this moment, I think we still have doubts about that ultimate commitment from the top to drive an anti-corruption agenda, which can ensure that people that are investigating corruption feel safe and don't feel threatened.
Has Corruption Watch ever looked into how much it costs to contract a killer? More or less what the average is?
I don't think that's really the type of research that we've done. I think it's if you're outside of those networks, it's very difficult. So no, that's not research that we've done per se.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Karam Singh is the Executive Director of Corruption Watch.